It's January 16th, 2018, and this is your scripture reading and devotional for today. Your scripture reading today comes from Genesis 29, verse 1, through Genesis chapter 30, verse 24, Matthew chapter 20, verse 1, through chapter 21 and verse 11, Psalm 9, 12 through 20, Proverbs 2, 4 through 6. And the passage that I've selected for us to look at today is Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. We have that parable of the laborers there. And I'm not going to take the time to read through the entire parable. That's part of your reading for today. And likely you already know the parable to some degree. But when you're reading that today, of all of the many applications that can be made from this parable that we typically hear made from this parable, I want us to pay attention to one in particular. We need to pay attention to our own faithfulness to God. So many times we put a great deal of effort, a great deal of focus on paying attention to other people. And that's okay. That's necessary. We're supposed to be watching out for each other. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25 says that we're supposed to be keeping a close, watchful eye on each other. And that's why we don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together. We're supposed to be together, and the more frequently we're together, the better, because that way we can see what's going on with each other. We can help each other in our faithfulness to Christ. But we have to first pay attention to ourselves. You'll recall the illustration that Jesus gave of the person with the plank sticking out of their eye trying to get a speck out of their brother's eye, and that won't work. You got to first pay attention to the plank in your own eye. Then you can help your brother get the speck out of his eye. Well, we have somewhat of a similar application here with verses 13 and 15, or 13 through 15 of this parable, where the end of the day has come, and the landowner is paying the laborers that had come through the day, and he pays the first ones that have been laboring all day what he agreed to pay them. He didn't change what he agreed to pay them. But then the others who came later through the day, he gives them the same thing that he gave the ones that had been working all day. And they're offended at that, and they say, that's not right, that they're getting paid the same thing we were promised, and we've been working here all day, and some of these people have just come in the last hour. And yet you're paying them the same thing that you paid us. Well, there's a very important response there in verse 13, where Jesus says that the landowner answered one of them and said, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong." Now think about that. This person is complaining that somebody else was getting paid the same thing that they were getting paid. But what were they getting paid? Well, they were getting paid what the landowner agreed to pay them. He wasn't doing anything wrong to them. They came and they worked and received the wage that they agreed to work for. So he says, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. That is, you agreed to work for a denarius. I paid you a denarius. So what is your issue? What is your problem? Well, their problem was they were paying attention to what somebody else was getting rather than them getting what was promised them. And so he says, take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or now notice what he says here. Is your eye evil because I am good? Now, somebody with the right heart, somebody with the right mentality toward other people, compassion and care and love for other people, would have looked at that and said, well, that's wonderful. That person didn't have an opportunity to work all day. This good landowner went and hired them in the last hour of the day and yet paid them as if they had worked all day. Isn't that wonderful? But that's not the way they looked at it. They looked at it as though they had been slighted. Now, if if we're doing what we know is right, we're doing good, we're going through our daily lives, we're being faithful to the best of our ability, and no one really, gives us any kind of special recognition for that. We just do what we do because it's the right thing to do. And then someone else who we might look at and say, well, they don't do as much as we do, and which is the wrong way to look at what other people do to begin with. But we might look at somebody else and they don't do as much as we do, and we spend a lot more time in the study of our Bible and in the work of the church and in our activity, in our actively serving the cause of Christ. And yet another person does what we might consider one little thing, and everybody pats them on the back and says, "Oh, that's great, that's wonderful, that's it's great that you did that," and they get this acknowledgement and we look at that and we say, well, I do a lot more than that. Why are they getting all the... Well, what difference does it make what kind of acknowledgement that person gets if we know we're doing the right thing? See, we need to be satisfied with our own faithfulness. And if somebody else gets some acknowledgement for what they do, that's wonderful. Maybe they need that kind of encouragement where we don't. Maybe they need that kind of acknowledgement where we don't. And so, if we know that we're doing what's right, then why would we look at what someone else is doing and what acknowledgement they might get for that as though we've been slighted? We just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. But in the illustration here, in the parable here, they were looking at the landowner as though he had slighted them somehow, as though he had done wrong. He said, "Is your eye evil?" See, you're looking at this in an evil way. You're looking at this in a bad way, rather than looking at it in a way of love for your brethren or love for others, because in the parable here, it's the difference between Jew and Gentile. The Jews who had been following the covenants all along, and then the Gentiles brought in only after Christ established the new covenant. Why wouldn't they rejoice over the Gentiles receiving the grace of God, rather than looking at that and rebelling against it? All of the trials that Paul went through, all of the persecutions that Paul went through, was Jews who were envious over the gospel being taken to the Gentiles and trying to stop that from happening. Why would they do that, rather than just doing what they knew to be right? That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go through our daily lives doing what we know is right. And when something good happens for someone else, to, as Paul says in Romans chapter 12, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And so there's a great lesson here in that for us. He says, "Or is your eye evil because I am good?" We know that we have an inheritance reserved in heaven for us. We know that we have treasure laid up in heaven by our faithful life to Christ. And for those who come in much later than us, they have that same inheritance. They have that same treasure stored up in heaven, that same reward to be received. And we should rejoice over that, certainly not be envious. Thank you for watching today. And if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please let us know in the comment section below.